Chapter 16. Zeus. The following morning at school, Osokin, from the moment he enters the school, feels something unusual in the air. The boys are all standing about in groups and whispering. On the landing, Osokin runs into Sokolov. "Well, brother," says Sokolov, "if it's your doing, then well done. But this time it'll be all up with you." "What do you mean?" "Oh, don't pretend to be innocent, you know quite well." "I don't," says Osokin. "As soon as I came in I felt that something had happened. But what is it?" "Well, it's like this. Yesterday the circuit inspector was due to arrive. You know they say he's had a grudge against Zeus for a long time. He arrived after 5, and it seems that someone had put spectacles on Caesar, you know, over the door in the reception room, and had written on the wall, 'Your Excellency is a fool,' or something of that sort. Well, I bet you know more about it than any of us. There was a row. The inspector was furious, or pretended to be. He hissed at Zeus that he couldn't keep the school in order, and without another word turned and went away. Now there's an inquiry going on. Zeus has ordered all the servants on this floor to be dismissed. Cockroach, who was on duty, Vasily, and the Cossack, they all put it on you. You were sitting alone in a classroom at the time, and you went away just before the inspector's arrival. There, they are calling for you." "Osokin to the headmaster! Osokin! Osokin!" Voices can be heard shouting in the corridor. Osokin walks through the crowd of schoolboys. They all look at him with curiosity. He goes along the corridor, through the library where the bust of Caesar stands, and into the big hall. At the far end of the big hall, with its life-size portraits of the Tsars in heavy gold frames, the headmaster, Zeus, the assistant headmaster, Gustav Luktik, and several teachers are seated at a long table covered with a green cloth. 3 servants, 2 assistant masters, and Krinchek, alias Turnip, the master who was on duty the day before, are standing near. Osokin walks up to the table. The headmaster is very angry. Osokin glances at the servants. 2 of them, and especially Cockroach, look at him with suspicion and hostility. Vasily, his particular friend, tries not to look at him. At first the headmaster cannot speak for fury and simply snorts. At last he finds his breath and begins, avoiding Osokin's eye. Osokin feels that Zeus is particularly displeased with himself because yesterday he laughed when he heard about the Volga and the ochre. "Were you kept in till 5 o'clock in a classroom yesterday after lessons?" "Yes," says Osokin. "Did you leave the room?" "No." "Did you go into the library?" "No." "You lie, you scoundrel!" The headmaster turns purple in the face and bangs his fist on the table. Osokin flushes and takes a step towards him. Their eyes meet. Something dangerous flashes across Osokin's face, and the headmaster looks away. Osokin wants to shout something rude and insulting at him to pay him back for his offensive language and for all that he has endured at the school, for all the boredom, all the lack of understanding. But his voice catches, his lower lip trembles, and for a few seconds he is unable to say anything. Recovering his breath, the headmaster, without looking at Osokin, says, "Which man was on duty?" "Ivanov," says the assistant headmaster, and Cockroach comes to attention. "Did you lock the door of the classroom where Osokin was sitting?" says the headmaster. "Can't say, Your Excellency, who locked it. I was in the garden," says Cockroach. "When I came back to open it, it wasn't locked. Must have opened it himself for sure." Cockroach looks spitefully at Osokin. This look gives Osokin an unpleasant feeling. He feels sorry for Cockroach and the other 2 men, but somewhat disgusted at the thought that he could ever have joked and talked with him in a friendly way. "How do you mean, opened it himself?" asked the headmaster. "Must have broken the lock, Your Excellency. I came to unlock it and not one key would turn. I pull the door, it opens. I say to him, 'You're not locked in, Osokin,' and he says, 'Yes, I am locked in, don't say anything,' and gives me 20 kopecks. Here." Sweating with the strain, Cockroach thrusts his hand into his pocket and produces a 20 kopeck coin. Everybody looks at the coin and then at Osokin. Osokin is both disgusted and amused. He realizes that this 20 kopeck coin is the strongest evidence against him, and although he knows that what happened was quite different, he feels that it is useless to protest. He has had far too good a schoolboy training to do this. It is considered permissible to try to prove oneself innocent, and for that purpose to lie as much as is necessary, but only when there is a chance of succeeding and of making one's accuser look foolish. If there is no such possibility, the schoolboy's code demands a stoic silence, no matter whether the accusation is just or unjust. At the same time, Osokin has a growing desire to laugh. Suddenly he feels very remote from all this. He becomes conscious of himself as a grown-up man. He feels that what is happening here is not happening to him. His indignation disappears completely, and he now coldly observes the proceedings as an onlooker. "Is the lock really broken?" the headmaster asks the assistant headmaster. "The lock won't work," says the latter. "Something must have been put into it." "Enough," says the headmaster. He snorts again for a second or two. "Well then," he says, at last addressing Osokin, "you can exercise your talents elsewhere. We have no need here for lockpickers, liars and scoundrels. You can let the men stay on," he says, aside to the assistant headmaster. "They must not suffer because of this." "I think there are enough of us here for the council," he says, looking around. Then he addresses one of the assistant masters. "Take him to the reception room and wait with him. When I send for you, you will bring him here." Osokin walks with the assistant master known as the violin to the reception room. As he passes, he sees the cockroach still standing with the 20-kopeck coin in his open palm, and he feels so amused that he only restrains himself with an effort from laughing aloud. They come to the reception room, and there they sit and wait. Osokin's brain is somewhat dulled, and he does not want to think of anything. After 5 or 10 minutes, another assistant master, a little man with a red beard known as Prophet Elias, opens the door from the big hall and nods to the violin. They go to the big hall. The headmaster takes a large official-looking sheet of paper from the table in front of him, coughs twice, and then reads aloud without looking at Osokin. "By the decision of the Masters' Council, the pupil of the 4th form, Ivan Osokin, is excluded from the number of pupils of the 2nd Moscow Gymnasium with a conduct mark of 3. The headmaster puts the sheet on the table, then rises, walks to the desk with an air of importance, and takes up a report book. Osokin realizes that all is over for him here. For a moment he is again seized with anger against the stupid people who are deciding his fate, but, as if in answer to this, he is pierced by the cold sensation that it has all happened before, and happened in exactly the same way. He feels himself disappearing in this sensation. He is not. He does not exist. Something is happening around him, but not to him. Therefore all this is completely and absolutely of no account to him. He can no more be troubled by it than he can be troubled by some event of Roman history. All these people, the headmaster, the assistant headmaster, Cockroach, think that this is actually happening now. They do not understand that everything has already been, and that nothing therefore exists. Osokin cannot explain to himself why, if this has happened before, it means that it does not exist now. He feels that it is so, and he feels that nothing concerns him any more. Chapter 17. The School Infirmary. The violin touches Osokin on the shoulder, and they walk out of the hall. "What's to happen to me now?" Osokin asks with a grin. "May I go home?" "No," answers the assistant master. "Your mother will be sent for, and she will take you away." He walks with Osokin through all the corridors and staircases to the school infirmary. The infirmary consists of 3 small rooms set apart on the ground floor, with a separate entrance from the courtyard. 2 boys from the 1st form, dressed in blue dressing gowns, are there, and a fat youth in spectacles from the 7th form, who Osokin dislikes. The boys suspect him of having syphilis, and he spends almost all his time in the infirmary. The assistant master leaves Osokin and goes away. Osokin sits by the window and looks out into the street. The sensation of indifference to himself and to everything else in the world disappears. He feels himself a schoolboy at whom the headmaster had just been shouting, a schoolboy who has just been expelled from school. "What have you been up to?" Osokin asks the youth in spectacles. Oh, nothing in particular, answers Osokin, turning away. The boy stands near him, for a time obviously not knowing what to say, then goes into another room. Time passes slowly. The first form boys are playing dominoes in the next room. Osokin sits looking out of the window. He feels so sick at heart that he is even afraid to think. What does it mean, he says to himself. I know that it was necessary for me to finish school so that I could do everything as I wanted. But what has come of it? The same thing over again. Now I know that then, too, I sat in the same way by the window and thought exactly what I am thinking at this moment. Here I am expelled from school. So it means that everything repeats itself without change. Then what was the use of returning? It means I shall never go to the university in the normal way. Poor mother, she wanted that so much. What a damnable thing to do to her. Her heart is not so strong. Now they will drag her here and tell her all sorts of horrible things about me, and she will feel that I am almost ruined. In any case, all this means a great deal to her. Afterwards, of course, things will come right somehow. I shall work for a matriculation. It does not follow that I shall have to go to the military school. But it is now that it is so bad. Poor mother, these idiots will torture her to death. What I cannot understand is why I did it, for I remember the whole business of the spectacles and Caesar perfectly well. To be quite honest with myself, I knew everything from the beginning to end. I knew I should be caught. I even knew I should be accused of breaking the lock, and yet I've done exactly what I did before. Why the devil did I want to play with Caesar or the circuit inspector? The most curious thing of all is that then, the other time, I also knew everything, and afterwards sat here just like this and accused myself of having done it all in spite of the fact that I knew beforehand what the result would be. I remember this quite clearly now. What will happen next? Is it possible that everything will go on in the same way as before? No, that would be horrible. It is impossible to believe that. I must find something to hold on to. It cannot continue like this. I must not give way to these thoughts. Yes, it is all bad, very bad, but after all, there must be some way out. Evidently, I could not alter anything at school. Probably everything had been spoiled beforehand. Here my hands were tied, but now I shall be free. I shall work. I shall read. It is much better so, after all. I shall prepare for matriculation far more quickly at home. In 2 years I can be at the university, only I must persuade mother not to be too disappointed. I must make her understand that school was only a hindrance to me. That is probably the reason why everything may be for the best. I can begin now with a clean sheet and write on it whatever I like. Osokin, sitting motionless by the window, begins to feel cold and hungry. Sounds are heard overhead. The second break, thinks Osokin. Then the noise dies down. Evident lessons have begun. The time drags on incredibly slowly. At last lunch is brought to the infirmary. The dining hall attendant who has brought the food chats with the infirmary attendant. The seventh form boy in spectacles goes up to them, and Osokin can hear that they are talking about him. A wave of anger and disgust with all of them sweeps over him. He is sick of sitting here. He's bored and cold. He wants to eat and wants to smoke. But at the same time he wants this to last as long as possible, so that his mother shall not arrive too soon. Lunch is over. There is a clatter of plates. The trays are cleared away. The noise begins again upstairs. Long break. Time drags on endlessly. At last everything is quiet once more. Osokin begins to hope that his mother will not come. It will make everything much easier. He will then be sent home with an assistant master. But after the fourth lesson I shall try to go out with the day boys, he thinks. The porters, of course, have been told not to let me get out, but it might be possible to slip through. Osokin goes into the next room. The attendant is not there. It would be possible to walk out, but he must wait for a break. He sits down by the window again. Now he has not the slightest desire to think about school and about being expelled. His thoughts wander to other far more pleasant subjects. Osokin thinks of the summer, of how he will buy a gun and go out shooting. One scene after another comes up and passes before him. A wooded lake, a marsh with silver birches. Then he looks round and is almost amused at having taken his expulsion from school so calmly. I believe I really did know that this was going to happen, and that is why I'm not surprised, he says to himself. At last, when Osokin least expects it, a door bangs in the adjoining room, and the assistant master comes in with his mother. The first-born boy stands at the door and gazes at her with curiosity. The fat boarder opens his door and also looks on curiously. Osokin sees that his mother is deeply distressed, and his heart sinks. That calm with which he was so pleased a moment ago now appears to him as the most callous selfishness. His plans for matriculation and going to the university fall to the ground, and nothing remains except the naked and ugly truth. He is expelled from school. And he knows what that means to his mother. "What is all this, Vanya?" she asks. He makes no reply, but glances towards the assistant master. "Why do you ask me in front of this ape? What can I say?" he says in his mind. But really he looks as though he is silent because he is ashamed. "Let's go," he says aloud. "I will tell you everything. It was all quite different." They leave the infirmary and go through the corridor and the empty gymnasium to the hall. Suddenly Osokin feels that after all he is fond of the school, and that he is sorry to be leaving, never to return. It is stupid and annoying to realize that he is being expelled. He sees that his mother is very depressed, and he feels most uncomfortable. In the hall his mother is nervous. For a long time she cannot find her gloves. She looks for a purse and gives the porter a much bigger tip than is necessary. Osokin is terribly sorry for her, and at the same time annoyed with her for coming. It would have been far better if she had left him to get out of this alone. They go into the street. "What are you doing to me, Vanya?" she says. "Why do you subject me to such humiliation? And what are you doing to yourself?" Her voice fails her. Osokin feels that she is going to burst into tears. "Let's go home, mother," he says. "I will tell you everything there." He wants to add that everything will be all right, but after one glance at his mother's face, he is silent. They get into a sledge and drive off. Osokin does not speak on the way home, and only occasionally looks at his mother. She, too, is silent. "There is one thing I want to know," thinks Osokin. "Why, knowing all that was going to happen, have I acted as I have done? Why did I not act differently? And, if I couldn't, why does it often seem to me that everything depends entirely on myself?" He thinks intently. "A rabbit, when a snake looks at it, probably reasons in exactly the same way as I do," he says to himself. "Why does it not run away? It is quite free, and it knows what is going to happen. The snake will swallow it if it doesn't escape. It wants to run away, but instead of that it moves nearer and nearer to the snake. Each moment as it moves nearer to the snake's jaws, it probably wonders why it is doing it. But the chief point is, why does the rabbit do this, knowing all the time exactly what the end will be? Perhaps the rabbit thinks there will still be a possibility of escape. Does all this mean that I must admit I am beaten? No, I am not beaten. I shall try to find Zinarda now." By this time Osokin has developed the habit of observing his own thoughts and of looking at himself from outside, and he suspects that trying to find Zinarda will be merely a pretext for not staying at home, which means not doing any work, and that ultimately nothing will come of his fine intentions. He feels thoroughly disgusted with himself. Were he alone, Osokin could easily restore his spirits by making himself dream about something pleasant. But his mother's presence is a living reminder and a living reproach that forces him all the time to see the real truth of life and the results to which all his good intentions have led. At the same time he is very tired of thinking in a minor key. As he involuntarily puts it to himself, and his thoughts wander off by themselves in more pleasant directions, he dislikes remaining in an unpleasant mood for long. Chapter 18. At Home. Osokin and his mother reach home and go into her room. "Well, what does all this mean?" she asks. "Which lock did you break, and what other dreadful things have you done? The headmaster spoke about you as though you were a criminal. They would not even allow me to take you away at my own request, so that you would have the right to go to another school. Now you cannot because you are expelled by the decision of the council." She wipes her eyes with her handkerchief. "I don't know what you are going to do." "That's all nonsense, mother," says Osokin. I didn't break any lock. I was left in an empty classroom after lessons. There was not even a light, and I became terribly bored. You simply cannot imagine how boring it was there. I tried the door, and it wasn't locked. Perhaps the lock really was broken, I don't know. I walked down the corridor and came to the waiting room, you know, where the big library is. They were expecting the circuit inspector yesterday. Then Osokin stops. You see, there's a bust of Caesar there. Well, I put blue spectacles on it. What blue spectacles? Just ordinary spectacles. I had a pair I bought at Sakharova once. I don't know why. Well, I put the spectacles on Caesar. They made him look awfully funny, just like a German professor. And then I wrote on the wall in chalk, "Welcome, Your Excellency," with 5 mistakes in the spelling. And is that all? That's all. I drew an ugly face on the wall too. Osokin's mother wants to laugh, but at the same time she feels very disheartened. What she dreaded most has happened. Vanya will be left without education. The future seems so dark, and this has happened so unexpectedly. It had seemed to her of late that he had become more used to school. She is annoyed with him, but she is much more indignant with the school authorities. She looks at her son. He is constantly thinking about something, and he is obviously suffering too. She is deeply grieved and wounded for his sake. She is sorry for him and sorry for all her shattered hopes, but she too wants to believe in a brighter future. In any case, he has done nothing wrong. Foolish maybe, but nothing really bad. He is incapable of it, of this she is certain, and with this thought a great weight falls from her. "What are you going to do now?" she asks. "Oh, mother," says Osokin, "everything will be much better now. I'm going to prepare for matriculation, and I shall go to the university much sooner than I should have done from school. You saw how I learned English. It will be the same with other things. You'll see. At school I was only wasting time." Osokin's mother becomes sad again. "You will need a tutor to help you," she says. Osokin starts. She had said this then, in exactly the same voice, with the same uncertainty and helplessness. He remembers it. "I will work, mother, I will," he says. "Forgive me for what has happened. I will do everything. You'll see." Chapter 19. Tenecture. 18 months later, Osokin's mother is dead. He is living with his uncle, a rich landowner, in a big country house in middle Russia. The veranda opens onto the garden, a long avenue of lime trees. Osokin, in top boots, a white Russian shirt with a leather belt, a white cap, and with a Cossack whip hanging from his wrist, is walking up and down on the veranda, waiting for his horse. "Outwardly everything is turning out very well," he says to himself, stopping and looking at the garden. "But all the time something oppresses me. I cannot reconcile myself to the thought that mother is dead. I can't, and I don't want to. It's 6 months ago now, but to me it seems like yesterday. I know I shall always feel like this, and I know it's all my fault. Mother was taken ill soon after I was expelled from school, and she never fully recovered afterwards. I know it, and the worst of it is, I knew it all before." He stands thinking. "Whether all that about meeting the magician was a dream or not, I don't know," he says to himself. "But for me the future has a taste of the past. I know that everything that will happen to me has already happened before, so I have no interest in the future. I feel that it holds nothing but traps and pitfalls. It seems to me that I see them all beforehand, but now that mother is dead I no longer care. I don't even want anything good for myself." He walks up and down near the veranda again. "I feel a little uneasy here," he says, looking round. "Uncle is a nice man, but I see that he is really well disposed towards me, but I have no confidence in the future. I feel that there is going to be trouble between us. I'm constantly on my guard, constantly expecting something, and because of this uneasiness, and because of I don't know what, I do nothing. It's 18 months since I left school, and I'm still thinking about starting work. I've read plenty of books during this time. I've learned Italian, I can read Dante, I've done some mathematics, but Latin and Greek, I believe I've forgotten how to read Greek. I can't force myself to begin. I shall have to take my examination in modern school. Even that is awfully difficult because of small things. In the syllabus there's so much that is dull and unnecessary. Divinity, geography and so forth. And with this examination, without Latin and Greek, I shall not be able to go to the university. But if I pass an examination, I know that Uncle will make it possible for me to go abroad to study. Yet I'm so indifferent now to everything that I hardly know whether I want it or not. Tanechka, his uncle's ward and housekeeper, comes out on the veranda. She is a tall, good-looking girl of Russian type, with a thick plait, rosy cheeks and large dark eyes. She is a little over 20. She has been to a girls' school in a provincial town and likes to wear a Russian peasant dress and to walk about barefoot. The servants say that she has got round the old man. Tanechka steals up behind Osokin and claps her hands above his head. Osokin turns round quickly and catches her by the arms. "Oh, Tanechka, how you frighten me!" "Let me go, you horrid thing, you'll break my arms." "I won't let you go." Osokin draws her nearer still. His face is quite close to hers. He looks into her eyes. He sees, so close to him, her slightly parted lips and her small white teeth. He feels the contact of her breasts, her shoulders, her whole body. Suddenly, for a moment, Tanechka stops resisting and her body becomes soft and tender. Her laughing eyes close and her warm lips, firm and full and smelling of strawberries, are pressed to his. Thousands of electric sparks run through Osokin's body. He is overwhelmed with a joyful surprise and an extraordinarily warm feeling for Tanechka. He wants to press her still closer to him, wants to kiss her, wants to ask why, how has she become like this? But Tanechka has already escaped from his arms and is standing on the other end of the veranda. "Look, they are bringing Whitelegs," she says, as though nothing had happened. But she looks at Osokin and smiles, and in her eyes there is a new expression. A groom leads a saddled horse up to the veranda. It is a sturdy bay mare with white legs, a rather short neck, and strangely expressive and lively eyes. She looks very trim with a high Cossack saddle and Caucasian silver stirrups. Osokin is now reluctant to go. Tanechka is still on the veranda, leaning against the balustrade. Osokin feels that if he were to put his arms round her and press her to him again, her body would once more become yielding and tender. This sensation troubles him and draws him to her. Tanechka assumes an air of innocence and says, "Are you going far, Ivan Petrovitch?" "To Orahovo for newspapers, Tatiana Nikanorovna," answers Osokin in the same tone, making a low bow. Tanechka raises her hand as if threatening to hit him, then turns and runs from the veranda into the house. "Come back in time for dinner," she calls. "I've picked lots of strawberries." Osokin runs down the veranda steps, tests the saddle girth and strokes the mare's white face down to her warm, soft nostrils. Whitelegs dances a little and rubs her head against his shoulder. Then he takes up the reins, lays a hand on the pommel, puts his foot in the stirrup, and lifts himself lightly into the saddle. "Goodbye," Tanechka calls to him from a window upstairs. "Don't forget me, right?" The groom smiles broadly. Osokin turns Whitelegs sharply round and breaks at once into a brisk trot down the avenue, keeping his legs well back and almost standing in the stirrups. The strong, resilient movement of the horse under him, the warm wind smelling of flowering limes, and the sensation of Tanechka in his whole body carry Osokin away from any thoughts. The trees flash swiftly by and the thud of hooves on the soft road sounds wonderfully pleasant. Whitelegs stretches her neck, pulling at the reins, and goes faster and faster in a swinging trot. Osokin presses his feet more firmly into the stirrups, and with a particularly joyful feeling in his heart, keeps quick time with the movement of the horse. "Darling," he says, stroking Whiteleg's neck, and without knowing whether he means Tanechka or Whitelegs. Tanechka's lips are again quite close to his, and the high firm breast beneath the white smock is warmly, tenderly, and trustfully pressed against him. He even feels slightly dizzy and tightens his grip on the reins. "Dear Tanechka," he says, "how wonderfully good it all is, but that means she felt the same thing as I did. Can that really be true?" Yes, it must be. That is why she became so—" At that moment a black cloud again rises from some deep place within him. Why, he asks, why is everything so beautiful from one side and so terrible from another? Why is Mother not here? If I knew she were alive, how I should enjoy everything, this road and the wood, Whitelegs and Tenectia. How I don't want anything. Yesterday I remembered an amusing story. I wanted so much to tell it to Mother, the one person who would have understood it properly. But she is not here, and I don't know why she is not here, or where she is, or what it all means. If it were possible, there is one thing only I should like, to bring back last summer. Why is it not possible? He does not realize himself why this thought makes him feel cold and frightened. It is as though he had suddenly touched a most painful spot that he had decided not to touch, or had roused a whole army of ghosts that might at any moment close in upon his soul from all sides. And, in an attempt to get away from himself, he lets Whitelegs go down the hill at full gallop, as only Cossack horses can. Then, standing in the stirrups, he trots across a small bridge, which shakes under the clattering hoofs, and swiftly climbs the hill, leaning forward in the saddle. Then, raising clouds of dust, he gallops like one pursued along the old unpaved high road, 100 yards wide and bordered with tall silver birches. An hour and a half later, Osokin returns at a walking pace on a heavily sweating horse. Lost in thought and sitting slightly sideways in the saddle, he rides out of the wood into a large clearing beyond which the copse adjoining the garden begins. He now thinks of nothing but Tenectia. Everything else has receded into the background. Tenectia, with her skirt lifted above shapely legs in striped stockings and tiny red shoes, walking carefully through the wet grass. Tenectia, as he once caught sight of her in the early morning, with bare shoulders and half-covered breast, leaning out of the window to count the call of the cuckoo. And again the touch of her firm lips, and her body becoming tender and soft in his arms. All these sensations and pictures make Osokin feel happy and light-hearted, but at the same time he wants to behave sensibly. Tenectia is a darling, he says to himself, but I must watch myself carefully so as not to spoil everything. What they say about her and Uncle is nonsense all the same. I feel that my relation to him might be spoiled because of Tenectia. If he notices anything, he will consider it his duty to protect her from me, and that is stupid. I don't want anything. Tenectia is part of nature, like this field or the wood or the river. I never imagined that the feeling of woman was so much like the feeling of nature, but I must keep myself in hand. With a touch of the whip, he urges his horse into a trot, and crossing the clearing rides through the copse towards the house. Tenectia is on the veranda, hulling some strawberries for jam, and when Osokin catches sight of her, an unaccountably cheerful mood takes possession of him. He wants to chat with her, to laugh and to amuse her. If he were not afraid of his uncle, he would ride onto the veranda and make Whitelegs kneel before Tenectia. The head groom had shown him some time ago that Whitelegs has been specially trained and knows some circus tricks. "Tenectia, what lots of mushrooms I've seen!" cries Osokin, springing from the saddle. "Where? Where?" Tenectia runs up to the veranda balustrade. "Mostly by the Servo swamp. Let's go after dinner, I'll show you." Tenectia throws back her plait and frowns. "All right," she says, "but it's not going to rain, is it?" "It doesn't look like it." "Very well, and now dinner is ready. Come along quickly." Osokin and Tenectia are walking in a wood. They have a big black dog called Polkin with them. Osokin is carrying 2 baskets full of mushrooms. They come to a shallow forest stream. All round are old pine trees and green alder bushes on the banks of the stream. It is now nearly 4 hours since they left home, and Osokin is completely in love with Tenectia. They have been talking without stopping. Osokin has told Tenectia about the school, imitating all the masters, and about the French exhibition in Moscow, and about Paris. He has never been there, although he fancies that he has, because he can see it clearly in his mind. Tenectia has told him about the admirers she has had in the district town, and about the theatre which she has twice visited. And all the time Osokin discovers fresh attraction in her. She laughs so infectiously when he told her about Caesar in blue spectacles. She has a rounded sunburnt neck, silky eyelashes and thick eyebrows. She is supple and strong like a nice young cat, Osokin thinks to himself. He is afraid of looking at her too much and often looks away. It seems to him that his glance may convey to her all he is thinking and feeling. He catches fire from his own thoughts. Tenectra often looks at him, and it seems to him that once or twice she had looked at him with some astonishment, as though she had expected something different from him. "We must cross to the other side," cries Tenectra, running down the stream. "Let's look for a ford." She sits down on the grass by the water and quickly pulls off her small shoes and sand-coloured stockings. When Osokin comes up to her, she is standing on the sand, gathering up the skirt of her sarafan, and Osokin sees her white rounded legs with their slim ankles and small feet, and it pleases him that Tenectra does not pay the slightest attention to him. Holding up her dress with one hand and balancing herself with the other, she walks carefully into the water. "Oh, what sharp stones!" she cries. "But how warm the water is! I'm going to bathe. Only don't you dare look at me. Go behind there and don't come back until I call you." Osokin walks over the knoll and comes down again to the stream which curves at this point. His heart is thumping, and he is conscious of an unusually pleasant excitement. A slight shiver runs through his whole body as though he was stepping into cold water. He feels gay and wants to laugh. He lies down on his back by the water and lights a cigarette. "Hello!" Tenectra's voice reaches him. "Vanya! Ivan Petrovitch, where are you? Hello!" "Hello!" cries Osokin, jumping to his feet. "Why did you go so far?" shouts Tenectra. "Come nearer." Osokin walks along the bank, scrambling through the bushes. He thinks she is still some way off, but suddenly the bushes part, and he sees Tenectra in the middle of the stream with the water only up to her knees, standing quite naked, full of quite unexpected lines and curves, white and glistening with water against the dark green background. Seeing him, Tenectra laughs aloud, slips down into the water, and splashing with her hands raises a shower of spray all round herself. "Don't go so far away," she cries. "I'm afraid to stay alone in the wood." For a moment she rises again from the water, provoking and defiant, and looking straight at Osokin. Their eyes meet, and at this moment it seems to him they know something that nobody else knows. Osokin's breath fails him from joyous excitement. Tenectra laughs, puts out her tongue at him, and plunges into deep water beneath the bushes. "Why did you blush?" she cries from the water, covering her breasts with her hands. "There, you've made me wet my hair. You're more afraid of me than I am of you. Go into the wood. I'm going to dress now. It's time to go home." Osokin goes slowly up the hill, listening to his beating heart, and sits down on the grass. It is all like a dream. Wild pigeons are cooing in the distance. A large spider drops slowly down from a fir tree on a shining thread. A few minutes later, Osokin gets up and walks down the other side of the knoll to meet Tenectra. She is dressed but still barefooted. It seems to him that she blushes slightly when he comes up to her, but she looks at him just as provokingly and defiantly as when she was in the water. "We must go home now," says Tenectra, as though nothing unusual had happened, but at the same time she again looks at Osokin in a slightly puzzled, and as it were, questioning way. Osokin wants to say something, but cannot find words. For several minutes they walk in silence. Tenectra nibbles a blade of grass and glances at him occasionally. Osokin, as he looks at her, cannot understand his emotions. Only yesterday he could have struggled with her, trying to take a green beetle from her. Only that morning he could have taken her by the waist, so simply and easily, and held her to him. Now Tenectra had become different. He feels an enormous mystery in her, and this mystery frightens and troubles him, and puts a magic ring round her over which he cannot step. Osokin wants to convey to Tenectra his desire to be sensible, but he feels that it would be silly to try. She might be offended. It would look as though she had been making up to him and he was refusing, though actually she has said nothing. And as for seeing her in the water, that was beautiful. Why should she be any more ashamed in front of him than that young birch? "How meek you have become," says Tenectra. "This morning you were quite different. What has happened to you? Have you a headache, poor boy?" She passes her hand quickly over Osokin's head, pushes his cap over his eyes, and laughing jumps away. "And which do you prefer?" says Osokin, straightening his cap, and feeling that this resolution to be sensible is sorely tried. "As you are now, of course." Tenectra drawls the words. "Now you are a regular Moscow young lady from boarding school. One can see that at once." And again she pushes his cap over his eyes and jumps away, laughing. Osokin flings down the basket of mushrooms, catches Tanechka, clasps her round her slim, supple waist, and presses his lips to her fresh, rosy cheek. Tanechka struggles away from him and laughs provokingly, and Osokin's kisses fall on her neck, her temples, and her throat. At last she twists herself out of his arms and cries, "Look, you've upset the mushrooms, my mushrooms, oh, you horrid thing!" She raises her hand as if threatening to strike Osokin. "Porcan, eat him up!" Porcan jumps round them and barks. Tanechka gathers up the mushrooms. Osokin gathers them up too, then seizing Tanechka by the hands, he draws her to him and kisses her eyes, her lips, her cheeks. Tanechka does not resist. On the contrary, she lifts her face to him and, with a serious expression and downcast eyes, seems to listen to his kisses within herself. Then they walk on down the green forest path, and from time to time Tanechka throws a glance at Osokin and laughs. Next morning, at daybreak, Osokin slyly opens the door of his bedroom on the ground floor by the stairs and looks into the long corridor. There is no one about. He opens the door and Tanechka slips out. She's wearing a long yellow dressing gown and a shawl over her shoulders. In the doorway she turns, throws both arms round Osokin's neck and kisses him on the lips with a long kiss that takes their breath away. Then, without a word, she wraps her head in the shawl and runs noiselessly upstairs. Osokin watches her go, and when she has disappeared round the bend of the stair, he goes back into his room. He glances with a vague smile at the crumpled bed, goes to the window, flings it open, and leans out into the garden. He is at once enveloped in a wave of cool, moist, fragrant air, full of the rustle of green leaves, the voices of waking birds, the sunlight on the tree tops. He feels his chest expanding, and he wants to draw in the whole garden in a breath. He sits on the windowsill, swings his leg outside, and jumps down to the garden. The grass is wet with shining drops of dew. The air is full of the scent of limes. Black Porcan suddenly appears, panting and wriggling with joy. He barks and jumps up, putting his wet paws on Osokin's chest. "Let's go to the lake, Porcan," says Osokin. "How can one go to bed now?" Porcan wags his tail as though he understands and rushes ahead down the avenue. By the lake, some distance from the house, Osokin sits down on a high bank under some young fir trees. He puts his hand on Porcan's wet head, which is laid on his knee, and with a fleeting smile sinks into thought. The sun struggles through the clouds and floods the whole lake with light. "How strange it all is," says Osokin. "And to think she came of her own accord. What an idiot Tolstoy is! What nonsense he wrote in the Kreutzer Sonata! Where is the nastiness and coarseness in all this? Darling Tanechka, how I understand her now. Yes, this is the real thing and the only real thing in the world. The truth is that it all belongs to woman, and only a woman has the right to decide. This must be understood, then everything else becomes quite different. But why do people not understand? Why have they created round it so much stupidity and vulgarity? And why do they hide from themselves the real meaning of it under all this mistrust and fear?" He sits for a long time looking at the lake and stroking Porcan's head. What has just happened passes before him again and again, repeating itself in the same words, the same fluttering of the heart, and the same half-frightened and joyous sensations. A vow has suddenly fallen, and life has sparkled with 1,000 lights, while the dark calumnies and lies which made love so frightening have rolled away like a cloud. In the village beyond the hill a shepherd is playing his reed pipe, and the long trilling sounds spin out like golden threads, joyously and painfully touching his heart. Yes, yes, Tanechka, she came of her own accord. How beautiful it was! She came and began to laugh and tease him, and he began to kiss her, and she laughed and said he was afraid of her. He could not have supposed that Tanechka was so experienced. But is she not right? And why may she not do as she likes? Of course she's right. Of course she may. Why would it have been better if she had married a deacon in a country town or the shopkeeper's son? Instead of this, she found a sweetheart for herself without waiting for a wedding. Uncle certainly knows nothing, but even now Tanechka sometimes meets the young forest inspector from Zyazori, and he is not her first sweetheart either. But who could blame her? She is so wonderful. How sweet and natural everything is about her. How softly she laughed when she let me undress her and kiss her. What warm lips she has, and what a sensitive body. Her breasts, shoulders, legs. It's extraordinary and marvellous. How can people slander love in the way they do, and make of it a vice and a crime? All those disgusting words, those vile expressions, all the medical, the physiological terms, as if there were anything like that in it. It is like a chemical analysis of a violin. No, it isn't. It's exactly like the sound of that pipe. There are no words for it. The sound of the reed pipe draws slowly nearer, and in Osokin's soul many forgotten thoughts are stirred, troubling but very familiar. Something comes back to memory, something rises to the surface from the dark depths. Now before him Osokin sees the lake all afire in the sun, and the white clouds fringed with gold, and the softly rustling green weeds. How incredibly beautiful it all is, he says. But why does death exist? Or perhaps there is no death. For a moment I can understand that. Nothing dies. Everything exists forever. It is we who go away from it, lose sight of it. Yesterday exists. Tenectua in the water, and I afraid to look at her. This has not died, and it cannot die. I can always go back to it. But there is a mystery about it, this mystery we call death. Yet in truth death is simply our failure to understand something. I feel this now. Why can it not always be felt? Then we should fear nothing, and it is Tenectua who has given me this. At last I understand that this is not merely the best, but also the most important, the most essential thing in life. When it comes, everything else must be silent and give way to it. How can one be sensible in relation to it? Those 2 hours are worth more than anything in the world. If I knew that my head was to be cut off for it today, I should kiss Tenectua just the same. And now I want to fly over the lake as I fly in my dreams. Chapter 20. Uncle. A few days later, Tenectua is sitting on the veranda with some needlework. Osokin comes in from the garden. I'm going to the Servo swamp after dinner. Would anyone like to come with me? Says Tenectua in a sing-song voice, smiling slyly without raising her head. I should, Tenectua dear, says Osokin, coming up to her. But you know we ought to be a little more careful. For the last few days we've been together all the time, and it's too noticeable. Well, what of it? Says Tenectua, biting off her thread and glancing up at him. Well, I think it may all end very badly. It seems to me that Uncle is watching us very suspiciously, and the servants are probably talking already. Little coward, says Tenectua scornfully. A regular young lady, afraid of everything. Well, let them see. Let them talk. I'm not afraid of anything. She tosses her head defiantly. Tenectua, darling, don't be angry, says Osokin. Just now you look exactly like Whitelegs when she is naughty. You're always laughing at me, says Tenectua, pouting. Either I look like Whitelegs or God knows what. Don't be angry, darling. Are you coming for mushrooms? Kiss me and I'll come. Oh, you ask too much. Well, let me kiss your neck. One little finger. Oh, bother, I quite forgot. They are laying the table. I must see to the sagusa. Tenectua runs away. She's a darling, says Osokin to himself. But we're walking on very thin ice, and it's sure to break. How suddenly it has all come about. He follows Tenectua in the dining room. Tenectua is bending over the table, stirring a mustard dressing for the herring. Osokin steals up to her and kisses her on the neck. She screams and strikes him with a napkin. Osokin clasps her around the waist and holds her whole body to him and kisses her on the mouth. Tenectua resists feebly, then turns in Osokin's arms, offering him one after the other her cheek, her ear, her neck to be kissed. At that moment the door opens and Osokin's uncle appears and stops on the threshold. Tenectua jumps away from Osokin. There now, thinks Osokin, I knew this would happen. He feels vexed and ashamed, and his heart is thumping violently. He is annoyed at not being able to hide his confusion, but at the same time he is amazed. So completely has everything happened as he had anticipated. His uncle looks at them and, without speaking, walks to the table. Osokin feels very foolish. The worst of it is having to sit at table and pretend that nothing has happened. Tenectua, confused and blushing, serves the soup, trying not to look at either Osokin or his uncle. The uncle is obviously furious, but says nothing. Osokin's one desire is to get away. His uncle reluctantly swallows a glass of vodka and without touching the zakuska takes his soup. The silence becomes oppressive. "Where did you go?" his uncle asks Osokin in an unfriendly voice. "To Orahovo for the letters and newspapers," answers Osokin. "A groom could have been sent." What does he wish to imply by that, thinks Osokin? That I'm doing nothing, probably. "You just gad about," says his uncle as though he were answering him. Then, after a long pause, he adds, "I want to speak to you. Come to my room at 4. At last dinner is over. Osokin goes into the garden, then walks round the house. Tanechka is nowhere to be seen. Osokin has an unpleasant feeling, a kind of disgust at all that has happened, but at the same time he notices with astonishment that he is very calm at heart, much calmer than he was in the morning. It is as if something has happened that was bound to happen, and now he feels easier because nothing depends on him. What will be, will be. He does not want to think. "It's all the same," he says to himself. "The devil take it. I knew it would happen, but I could do nothing differently. If everything were to be repeated, I should do the same again. No doubt it was silly to kiss Tanechka in the dining room, but sooner or later we should probably have been caught. I wonder what the old man is going to say. But whatever happens, I know I could not have given up Tanechka." Osokin walks to the copse at the end of the garden, passes through it, and comes out into a field. He sits down at the edge of the wood and remains there, almost without thought, for a long time. Then he comes home. It is still only 3 o'clock. "Where is the young mistress?" he asks a maid who is running across the courtyard. "The lady from Pilivanovo just called. The young mistress went away with her on our horses. They left their horses here to rest." Pilivanovo is about 30 miles away. Why the devil did Tanechka go there, thinks Osokin. That means she will not be home till tomorrow night. Most likely my uncle sent her off. What can he have in his mind? Osokin feels bored and depressed. He walks back to the garden and sits under an apple tree smoking. At 4 o'clock he goes to his uncle's room. His uncle is sitting in a leather armchair in front of a big desk. On the desk lies a sealed letter. "Sit down," says his uncle without looking at him. He evidently dislikes having to speak to Osokin and wants to get it over as quickly as possible. In his uncle's mood, and in what he was going to say to him, Osokin feels something of that dull, serious world of grown-up people which is always so hostile to him, and so utterly unlike the fantastic world of kisses, daydreams, Tanechka's bare shoulders, sunrise over the lake, and solitary rides along forest paths. He is acutely aware of the profound inner hostility between these two worlds. "Your mother wrote to me not long before her death," says her uncle, "and I promised to look after you." Osokin looks at the silver inkstand on the desk. If a little arched bridge could be made between the two inkpots, it would look like a pond at Sokolinniki. What is his uncle saying? "I see now that you are only idling here and doing nothing. I've decided to send you to Petersburg. It is no use thinking about foreign universities since you have been expelled from school. It means you are no good for that. Don't interrupt me. What I am saying is this. I see how you are working. Nothing will come of it. So I've decided to send you to military school. If you work, you will become an officer. You will go to Petersburg. Here is a letter to Colonel Yermilov. He prepares boys for the examination from military schools. You will live in his house. Here is money for the journey. Yermilov will provide you with funds for clothes and other expenses. Pack your things. The train leaves Gorolovo at 8:30. If you leave here at 7, you will be just in time." His uncle gets up. "I am going to town," he says. Then, still without looking at Osokin, he holds out his hand and after a hurried handshake walks out. Osokin goes to his room. He is hurt and upset and there is a lump in his throat. At the same time he feels with astonishment that he is almost glad. About what? He cannot answer himself, that something new and unknown lies ahead. Something will happen tomorrow that did not happen yesterday. This new something already attracts him. He has never been to Petersburg and has always dreamed about it. But what of Tanechka? That saddens him, and there is a pain at his heart. At the same time there rises in him a more and more unpleasant feeling towards his uncle. He is now ashamed to admit to himself that he had almost begun to grow fond of the old man. If he can treat me like this, thinks Osokin, then I'm glad it happened in this way. If he had wanted to, he could have found 1,000 other solutions. Why does he think that he has the right to dispose of us? Of course, I shan't let him see anything now, but if he imagines that he can make me give up Tanechka, he's greatly mistaken. Many different plans at once begin to form in Osokin's mind. He is not going to prepare for any military school in Petersburg. He will find some journalistic work or translations from English and Italian. He will prepare for the university and send for Tanechka to come to him. But he must write to Tanechka about this now, so that she will wait for him. He must not let her think that he will forget her, as her other sweethearts have done. He takes a sheet of paper and writes, "Darling Tanechka, Uncle is sending me to Petersburg to prepare for a military school, but I'm going to work for the university examination. Don't forget me. We shall meet soon. I won't tell you yet how and when, but wait for a letter from me. I'll send it to Gorolovo to be called for. When the letter arrives, they'll let you know from there. I kiss you many times as I did by the lake. Do you remember? Yours, I.O." He seals the letter and looks at his watch. It is after 5 o'clock. He is aware of a strange feeling. Little more than an hour has passed since the talk with his uncle, but it seems to Osokin that he himself is no longer here. Everything has become remote. The strongest feeling in him is one of impatience and a desire to get away as quickly as possible. I shall give the letter to Mishka, thinks Osokin, and tell him to give it to Tanechka in the garden, not in the house. He will manage it all right. Good, he says to himself, now we shall see, but I must pack. Yes, I understand why it is almost pleasant to know that I am leaving here. All the time I had the irritating feeling of being watched, because I don't work, because I go riding too often, and then Tanechka. In any case, I couldn't have lived here for long. I wish to have the right to do what I want, and not what someone else thinks good or necessary for me. I have never submitted to anything, and I never shall. 2 hours later, Osokin with his trunk is being driven to the station in a trocker with bells. Whitelegs canters on the right side of the middle horse. Osokin's heart is heavy, and hopeless thoughts creep into his mind. He thinks about his mother again, and how, when she was alive, he did none of the things that he wanted to do for her. All this was important then, he says to himself, but now nothing seems to matter. I don't want anything, and I don't care about anything. For some reason there arises in his mind the memory of the magician's room, and their last conversation. All comes back to him. It feels very real, but at the same time more like a dream, a very strange dream which is more real than reality, and compared with which all reality becomes like a dream. With a clatter of hooves, the trocker crosses the bridge at a slow trot. Whitelegs shies at the river and, dancing a little, presses nearer to the middle horse. The bells jingle more slowly. Osokin's heart throbs with a strange pain. Yesterday morning he walked here with Tanechka, and besides, a long, long time ago it had been the same. There was the same troika, the same river, the same piercing anguish in his heart. It has all been before. Osokin feels unutterably sad and wants to cry. At the same time, in the mysterious tomorrow, something flickers, something beckons, something inevitable and alluring is felt.